that there was issues of conduct, of harassment and the like, what process is there for those? Would you test those allegations? Would that be enough to trigger an inquiry if there were if there were a number of allegations, and where would you go to? And would you also if it appeared to be a few rogue elements in that organisation, would you then seek some systemic changes to ensure that it didn't occur again?
David Locke speaking. We would certainly want to assess the evidence that's been given to us and to see whether that could be substantiated, and that would be our first point of contact. We would ordinarily then contact the charity in question and raise the concerns that have been raised with us and see what comments they have. We would often want to see them at that stage and see whether there was any way we could get evidence from any third party. We have published a risk and proportionality framework which governs how we engage in these sorts of compliance matters, as we refer to them. But certainly if the issues were very serious, if they raised issues of misconduct, mismanagement of the organisation, if the beneficiaries of the charity or the funds of the charity were at risk, then those are the sorts of factors that would lead us to a stronger regulatory engagement. If we believe it's necessary, we can open a statutory inquiry under our legislation, and if we do so, we then have a number of regulatory powers at our disposal. They include, for example, the power to require organisations to provide information, to freeze bank accounts, to suspend and remove trustees, to appoint an interim manager in the place of trustees. So there are a number of quite strong regulatory powers that we do have, but we can only exercise those if the statutory grounds are made out, which are very much around misconduct, mismanagement and harm to beneficiaries or loss of assets. And if we're satisfied it's proportionate to do so. Our regulatory approach would very much be, in that situation, to sort out the problems in the organisation and to get the charity back on track. So we would very much be looking to the trustees, who are the people responsible for the management and administration of the charity. We'd be looking to see what steps they're taking to ensure this doesn't happen and that the people who benefit from the charity are fully protected. But if we're satisfied there's misconduct, mismanagement, and if we're satisfied that that's the proportionate thing to do, then we can remove the trustees, we can take other strong regulatory action.
Thank you. Sorry.
So Joanne Edwardes speaking. If I can just add also that this issue about dealing with concerns about detriment and harm was something that we did look at in some detail in relation to our guidance on charities for the advancement of religion. And we give, in an annex at the back of our guidance, some examples of what might constitute detriment or harm. And we do sort of look at a lot of those sorts of issues about whether there is any evidence about coercive tactics or any encouragement of violence or hatred, for example, towards individuals or anything like that, or anything which unlawfully restricted someone's freedom, or the way that the charities operate perhaps internationally, which might give rise to conflict perhaps. So we do give some more detail about the sorts of instances that we might regard as being detriment and harm. And I think if there was significant evidence to suggest those sorts of detriment and harm might be occurring, that's likely to be something we'd want to look into.
I'm just concerned about time factors, Ms. Edwardes. I just wanted to ask, that means that of necessity, if there is an inquiry into the public benefit an organisation provides, it could look at the issue of detriment in balancing whether the public benefit test is fulfilled. Is that what you're saying?
Joanne Edwardes speaking. Yes, the detriment and harm question is part of our public benefit test, and one of our key principles of public benefit is that any benefits that might arise to the public must not be outweighed by any significant detriment or harm, and that's a fundamental part of the public benefit test. So we would look at that anyway in the course of considering public benefit for any organisation.
Finally, earlier today we heard from the Cult Information and Family Support Group, and I think one of the complaints was that when when some people leave an organisation or a religion, they are cut off from their family members who remain in that religion. Is that something that would be considered in the context of detriment if there appears to be a systemic approach to cutting off family members, disconnecting from them if they remain, if some have left a particular organisation and other family members have remained in it, or don't you delve into that sort of thing?
Joanne Edwardes speaking. I think very much depends. I mean, certainly we know we've had very conflicting stories about those kinds of suggestions of detriment and harm. What we find is very difficult to get clear evidence either way. I mean, obviously, if there was very clear evidence that something was happening that was of that nature, we might look at it. There are also difficult issues sometimes about individual choice. And sometimes, you know, there are concerns expressed by family members, for example, of people who've joined religious organisations that they don't see them anymore. And, you know, it's difficult sometimes to establish whether that is a question of individual choice and people who are free and able to make those decisions, or whether there is actual evidence of detriment and harm and people are being prevented from speaking to family members. And as I mentioned earlier, restricting a person's freedom is one of those things that we specifically mention. And freedom, of course, is to come and go from the organisation. Freedom to interact, obviously, with whoever somebody wishes is something that we've specifically mentioned in our guidance as an aspect of what could be detriment and harm. But I just know the difficulty sometimes is getting clear evidence about that.
Thank you, Ms Edwardes.
Any further questions, Senator Cameron? Well, that concludes this segment then. We thank you, Mr Locke and Ms Edwardes, for appearing on teleconference from the UK for this segment of this inquiry. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's been very useful.
And that concludes today's proceedings.